Hey folks, my name is Adam and I like to make tiny nerdy things. Today I'm going to show you how I took Marin and Terran's house from Link's Awakening and brought it into the real world. Now I could have printed this out, but I didn't, so instead I'm going to measure everything off of my computer screen. So I'm going to measure the house top to bottom and then transfer that onto the little bit of XPS foam I've got, and then I'll cut out the first section. Then I'll outline the shape at the front of the building before cutting it all out. I like to use a really dull knife here so that instead of nice clean lines, I get some nice serrated steak knife edges. There's a couple beams in the front and the little curved beams on the side, which I've just cut out of XPS foam, and then I glued them onto the side, leaving enough space for the side wall to get glued in. And then we can get started on the back wall. Now, there's no references for the back wall, obviously, because it's a 2D game. But when you're inside the house in the game, it's just a blank wall at the back with a set of 3 blinds. So I've chopped out the section for the blinds, and obviously, we're using stir sticks. Then once I've got the stir sticks cut down to size, I'm going to shape the edges just to round them off a little bit and make them a little less sharp and a little bit more natural, and then I can glue them onto a separate stick which will line them up 4 deep, and it will also give me a section to attach to the inside of the house later on when I'm ready to put these on. So I need 3 for the back wall, and then I realized that I'm also going to need another 4 for the side walls as well. Then we can start gluing everything together and then attach the front piece, and you essentially have the entirety of the sort of house done. That's kind of it. There's not a whole lot of detail on it apart from that. Which means we can now get started on the roof. Now, I'm going to stop it here and point out that only idiots cut towards their digits. Making the under sort of frame of the roof is easy enough. We're just going to cut a couple rectangles and then cut the edges off of them. And then once we line them up, as long as we know the size of the side cuts, we can measure the bottom part, and that'll give us the perfect size for the triangle that will lean against it. Then we get sort of that nice roofy design. Oh no, not roofy design, that's the wrong phrase. We will end up with a very aesthetically pleasing slanted roof design. And a little bit of white tacky glue to hold the roof in place. Then once that's dry, we're ready to get started on adding the shingles, which are really the key to making this look like the house that it is supposed to look like. So to help with the sort of roundy, curvy bit of the shingles, I'm gonna glue a whole bunch of these little pieces of dowel on, which will help the shingles conform to the same shape, so when I glue them on, they're not all wonky and unsprung, because the last thing you want are unsprung shingles. To make the shingles, I've cut some thin pieces of XPS foam into whatever width these are. I didn't actually measure them, I put my ruler down. So whatever length or width my ruler is what these are. And then I'm gonna hold them in place using some white glue. And then, as with most of my projects, I'm going to take them off, clean up the white glue, and realize that it doesn't actually hold anything down. So then I'll come back with hot glue, and then once that's dry-ish, then I'll cut the edges so that they line up with the sort of template underneath. Now you may be saying, hey Adam, that looks kind of like a hobo's front teeth. That's fine. We'll get around to fixing it. See, it's already looking better. Doesn't it look just like you imagined it would? It's like a dream home. You're gonna see this on like the Houses of Beverly Hills or MTV Cribs. Is MTV Cribs still around? Anyways, just keep adding the shingles all the way up, cutting back the corners to align with sort of that trapezoidal shape that we set up in the first place. Now you wanna make the first side before you get started on the other sides. The reason for this is it's gonna be a lot easier to cut the shingles down to the right size and shape, assuming that there's nothing blocking you from the other side. So do one side first and then get started on the other one, and then I found it was easiest to do the smaller side pieces once the 2 big front and back parts were done. Then with the shingles finished, we're ready to add the sort of logs that are on the corner pieces as well as the little bit in the top. Now this is a fairly traditional Japanese style roof, which is called a yosemune, not to be confused with a Yosemite roof, but it essentially consists of 4 sides with a sort of beam running across the top center. In English, you'd call this a hip roof. So there's your daily dose of roof terminology. And then with those beams in place, we can attach the shingles running up the sides and then put a couple of them in the middle. These are wooden logs. So once they're in place, I'm gonna take my pencil and scribe some sort of wooden texture into them. I don't need to go too overboard since it's pretty light texturing, but I do wanna sort of gnarly up the tips of them and just make them look like wooden beams. Then we're on to one of the most important stages, which is fixing the hideousness that is this roof you see before you. Now, I've always been told that the biggest difference between like a master crafter and a beginner is that a beginner points out all their issues, whereas a master crafter is really good at hiding them. As long as I don't point these things out to you, you'd probably never notice them. Unfortunately, I'm recording this whole process, so you're gonna see everything I do that's wrong, but hopefully you'll see that I'm also semi-capable of hiding my mistakes.
Sucking at something is the first step towards being sort of good at something.
So at this point I've added the door frame, and the foam that I'm using here is thin enough that you can actually bend it, and then once it dries, it's pretty firm, so it'll hold that shape really nicely. Then I want to add the texture onto the outside of the building. So I'm going to use my pencil again to just draw some exaggerated rocky texture into it. So I'm just going to outline everything and then go over it again to give a nice sort of a deep crevassey look to it. And then of course we're on to the Black Magic Mod Podge mix to cover everything and make sure that it is durable, strong, and it will take paint well. Then with that, we're ready to get started on the grass. Now, I didn't have any greens that I like, but I did have 2 greens that I hated. And if I put them together, then I've got an excellent green for grass. So I will flatten this out to that thickness. I don't know what thickness it is. Then I can chop out some individual little pieces of grass, which I can then shape into an adorable sort of wind-pushed little bit of grass. And then this little guy, I'll put on my tray right here, and then I will make 1,000 more of them. Now, to make the adorable tree that's beside the house, I'm gonna cut out 3 progressively smaller circles, which I can then layer one on top of the other, and that's essentially how the tree is gonna be built. Now, I'm gonna use these circles as a template to make my tree puffs.
Tough.
Cough.
Laugh.
Draft.
Bow.
So once I've got a nice dome on the template, then I can roll out a nice stringy, wormy dealy of the green stuff, and then I'm gonna pinch the corners so that it's semi-squarish. This will give it a nice leaf shape when I slice it into individual little pieces. Don't worry, I'm not actually going that fast, I just sped the video up, so I don't want you to think that any of the large number of knife wounds in my hand are a result of me cutting too quickly. I cut myself when I go slowly. Then I'm gonna start to layer the leaves around, sort of coming from the outside and upwards to give it a nice tree-y shape. Then I'll do the same thing to the other 2 templates, and then I'm left with these beautiful leafy bits. Then, as is so often the case, I went in to get some brown to make the trunk and realized that I don't have any brown left. But I do have green and red, and if you smash green and red together, you get brown. So then I just need to make the stump, flatten out the top of that, and then we can start attaching the various different tiers of our 3-tiered cake tree. For the base, I'm going to use more XPS foam, and then I'll mark out the location of the house and the tree so that I can make the path that goes around the outside of the house and the tree. Then once I've got the pathway laid down, I can start grooving out the grass. I want the grass to be a little bit higher than the dirty path, just because the majority of the grass, like the green grass itself, is going to be painted on, and I want it to stand out just ever so slightly higher than the dirt path. So once it's marked out, I'll come back through at the end of my tools and just flatten it down so that it's a little bit lower. Now I got thinking, black paint and Mod Podge makes black Mod Podge, so what would brown paint and Mod Podge make? Well, spoiler alert, it makes brown Mod Podge. The path itself is just sort of a sandy brown. It's a pretty light brown color. So once I painted the entire thing, I wanted to make the center path a little bit darker. And then I got thinking, maybe I can add some like highlights around the edge of it. So I came back through with the darker color and started sort of blending it. Now, I've never applied makeup before, but I have to feel like based on the quality of how this turned out, I'd be pretty good at putting on makeup. Then the grass is just a base coat of green, and then I wanted to try something new for texturing the grass. So I took some undiluted green paint, just some thick, globby acrylic paint, and I'm gonna slap it on in just a couple places to highlight the grass. So the idea here is that when it dries, it'll dry thick, and it should help to provide a little bit more depth to the grass, a little bit more height, and hopefully make the flat grass look a little less flat without having to add anything three-dimensional. Then to make the house, I cut out a little section that will fit inside, and it's also got the little pathway that will be out front. That just gets painted gray, and then the house gets painted the exact same gray. Normally, with something like this, I would go over the entire thing with a wash, but because I want to keep sort of that cartoony video game aesthetic, I'm going to continue on with my makeup tutorial and blend some just darker gray into the lighter gray. Then all of the shingles will get painted a nice, whatever blue this is. This is primary blue mixed with white, and as is common with my painting techniques, I mixed until I got a color I liked and then used it until I ran out, knowing that I would never be able to make this color again. Then I added some different shades of blue with a little bit of more white, so it's a little bit of lighter blue, and then I added a tiny bit of green to make it sort of an aqua-esh blue, and then I highlighted a couple more shingles just to give it a little bit of variation in the shingle color, so they're not all the exact same blue. Then to highlight the end cap and all the wood grain, little bits of wood that will show through, I just used some bone white, which actually contrasted really nicely with all the blues, and then that will make it look like wooden logs rather than oddly shaped, marked up shingles. Then the final highlight is the sort of orange fabric that's draped over the windows, and then of course the door frame needs to be painted brown. And then the absolute final stage for the house is applying those little blinds that we made right at the start of the video. 3 in the back window, 2 on the sides, and the house is essentially finished. Now I happen to have these perfectly sized dowel just lying around. And using the old knifey rolly trick, you should be able to snap them off at just about the perfect size. Now they are a little bit too light colored, so I want to add a little dark brown around the outside to simulate bark. And I'm only just realizing now that I'm basically using the decapitated head of the brush to paint the body.
That's fucking metal as fuck, dude.
Then we're finally on to the main attraction, which is making our tiny Link. Now I didn't want to have to paint him, so I'm going to use colored clay. Because he's basically a cartoon character at this point, using the colored clay works really well, and I don't need to worry about any highlights or anything like that. I mean, I could always come back through and highlight after the fact, but I'm not going to, so yeah. So we'll start with shaping out the general shape of his head, and then add the nose, the eyes, the eyebrows, the ears. Then I can get started on attaching his hair, which will start with the sideburns and then sort of that comb-over toupee thing on top. Fun fact, the reason that Link wears a hat is because he's actually got a great big bald patch in the back. And then with that done, I'm going to throw the head in the oven and let it bake for a little while. I really hope no one's listening to this. Like, if any of my neighbors are listening to me record this, they're going to be freaked out. The body is just a lump of green clay with a brown belt and a gold buckle, and then a little bit of the skin color to make the neck, and then a couple macaroni loops of orange to create the arms, and then I can stick that head in, and I'll bake the entire thing as one. Then I made some itty-bitty boots and a couple of little white Hylian trouser legs, which I can glue his upper body onto once it's come out of the oven. Then he gets a tiny sword, he'll get a little hand, and a little Hylian shield. I'll paint it afterwards, I just wanted to get it all put together. Now I do want to point out that this is my second iteration, because my first iteration ended up looking kind of like Donald Trump.
Nobody knows the game better than I do.
And it also wouldn't be a Zelda diorama without some kind of cuckoo. Is it cuckoo or cuckoo? Without a chicken. You can't have a Zelda diorama without a chicken. Then we're on to the final assembly, which will be placing the house, the tree, and then, oh yeah, you remember all those individual pieces of grass we made? Yeah, they need to be glued in one by one. Somebody commented on one of my videos that editing Adam seems to really hate sculpting Adam. And the reason for that is crap like this. Sculpting Adam has this brilliant idea of making individual pieces of grass without taking into account that somebody's going to have to glue those in place, and then somebody else is going to have to go through and edit it so that it looks aesthetically pleasing. Now, I didn't glue the house in place because I want to be able to remove it to dry brush my grass. So I'm going to pull out the softest brush I have. This one I found in my partner's makeup bag. I don't know what I was doing in there. Then ever so gently, I'm going to dry brush all of the grass as well as the edge of the tree to give it a nice sun-kissed appearance. And then I'm going to glue my chicken before gluing the house in permanently. On the top of the house, there are 4 adorable little flowers, which I made off camera, and I'll glue into place. And then I also made a tiny terracotta planter, which will just get glued into the window frame. Then we're ready to take our decapitated wooden logs and glue those in place. Now, I'm not even remotely concerned about them lying wonky, because they all actually kind of lie wonky. So it wasn't just laziness and standing them flat, they're supposed to look like this. Then the only thing left to do is pop Link into the door frame, and I think we're onto our Glamour Shots. There you have it, folks. I hope you enjoyed this one. This was a hell of a lot of fun to do. I've been on a bit of a Zelda binge, and I'm not entirely sure why, but I think it's okay because Zelda is the tits. Otherwise, while Link and his house spin in the background here, I'd like to take a moment to thank my newest patrons, Emily Monaghan, Vigard, Ellen Carlson, Doll Motion, and Hannah. You join the illustrious few who are helping to support me while I do these silly videos making tiny, nerdy things. If you would like to be one of these beautiful, beautiful people, then you can join me on my Patreon. The link is in the description below. Otherwise, I will always accept cold, hard subscriptions, likes, and comments. I'm always looking for ideas to steal and pass off as they're my own, so let me know in the comments below what you would like to see, and I will add it to the ever-growing list of things that I may never actually get around to doing. Otherwise, if you liked this, we'll see you back here next week. Cheers.